Last week, I posted about taking second at a local store showdown with Yellow Ahsoka. Yes, the set 3 starter deck leader that everyone thinks is terrible. And after I posted about that on socials and on Discord, I had a bunch of people asking for the deck list, so I figured, why not return to making some deck profiles for Star Wars Unlimited? And this is the perfect opportunity to showcase my very fun to play Yellow Ahsoka aggro deck. Let's jump right into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck and welcome at last to another Star Wars Unlimited video. I know it's been a little bit and especially been a little while since we've done one of these deck profile videos. Been a lot of judging, been a lot of just engaging with a lot of other games and things in the meantime, but I'm happy to finally be getting some more Star Wars Unlimited content back on the channel with this deck profile today. Now, if you clicked on this video, you are for some reason interested in my Yellow Ahsoka aggro deck, and one thing I want to make really clear right out the gate before I even show you the list is that this is not the top tier aggro deck in the format. If you clicked on this thinking that maybe this crazy guy broke the meta and figured out an Ahsoka deck that is stronger and faster than Sabine or any other aggro deck, that's not what's going on here. For all intents and purposes, I think Yellow aggro is a basic shell. It can fit into a lot of different leaders, and this deck just has a couple of little tweaks to kind of make Ahsoka work in it. I think still, compared to the top quality aggro decks in the format, this is probably going to be about a turn or maybe just an action or two behind them a lot of the time. But this is a capable aggro deck if you just are a huge Ahsoka fan and you want to win games with her. I can recommend this deck. It's going to have some pitfalls that we'll talk about in a little bit, but it is a really fun deck, a really fast deck, generally winning on turn 4 in many games. And so it should be a lot of fun to play if that's what you're looking for. Now let's pull up the deck list and start talking about this deck. Now, Yellow Ahsoka, obviously Ahsoka is the leader, and we're just using level 1313 as the base because it's on Coruscant. And that, of course, is where she went into hiding after she left the Jedi Order. So it just made sense. It's very important to get flavorful like that. But we do have our Ahsoka leader as well. And as you know from the starter deck, she is interesting. She's got a coordinate only action ability, which allows you to attack with a unit and give it +1/+0, which is a third of a surprise strike, which isn't a lot of a surprise strike, but it is some amount of a surprise strike. It does have that coordinate requirement, and I will say that is something that you are going to battle a lot. Obviously, your opponents are going to be destroying your units all the time, and you're going to need to keep trying to fill the board in order to get that turned on. But I want to really press that it's not actually that important. Honestly, getting to use the ability once or twice in a game is great. That's really similar to what a lot of Sabine decks do. If you think about it, Sabine decks will activate their ability to deal 1 to each base a couple of times in a lot of games. There are some games where they get a little bit of that bonus of being able to kind of like ensure the damage in the long game, and we don't have that here. But instead, you don't deal damage to your own base, which is kind of nice in those aggro mirrors, like against Sabine. Typically, a lot of the time, this coordinate, I'll just say this right away, to play around this, you're looking to just play in the opposite arena of your opponent. This is an aggro deck. You are going to play your units and attack the opponent's base the majority of the time. The only case really when you don't do that is either when you're in like an aggro mirror and you are kind of reading the game state and you decide that it makes sense to clear your opponent's board because it'll set you up to potentially win the game about a turn later, but you won't lose in the meantime. And there are cases against like Sabine decks where that does come up for me, or against certain there's certain units when you just have to take them off the board. You're playing a Piet deck and they play a Piet unit. You know things are not going to go well for you if all of their stuff is ambushing as well. So, you just got to attack into that and clear that. Otherwise, a lot of the time, you're hitting base. You are hitting base and you are hitting base because you will race them faster than a lot of other decks will. And that is because Ahsoka has actually, I'm going to say, a reasonably strong, I think surprisingly decent unit side. A 3/6 with coordinate. She is a 5/6. That is a turn 4 flip, and for a 5/6 that then has some benefits, like we have the Ahsoka's Padawan lightsabers in here. She's going to crack in for a ton of damage, and that's why you do actually still consistently close the game on turn 4 in, I guess on average, I would say. So a lot of your gameplay in this deck is really built around playing unit, trying to build out that coordinate. You know, you can start to get coordinate pretty easily on turn 3. You can do it on turn 2 in the right circumstances, but you can get it pretty easily on turn 3. And then on turn 4, your opponent will have probably tried to attack some of your units at that point. But usually when Ahsoka flips herself out, you can fairly easily kind of pad your actions by attacking first to get yourself to be able to have 2 other units in play when she flips to turn on her coordinate, have 1 resource available to get the lightsaber swing, and crack in for that 7 damage in addition to whatever else you've been able to push that turn. That's how this deck goes so fast. That's why it works. And that is, if you're an Ahsoka fan, that's what's going to be really fun about the deck, is putting Ahsoka into play and just doing, you know, a ton of damage. Now let's do a quick, now we kind of have the strategy out of the way. Let's do a quick look through just the basic card list. This, look, I'm not claiming this is an innovative deck necessarily. A lot of the shell is the shell that's existed since Spark of Rebellion for a red-yellow aggro deck, with some little sprinkling of things that have released in sets 2, 3, and 4 that just kind of make sense in the deck, and I'll hopefully explain those pretty well. First thing we're going to look at is Greedo. Of course, Greedo is a decent 3/1 1-drop. You can't play him to every board state because he dies really easily, but he can sometimes, if your opponent does want to trade into him, trade with something else, get you a little bit of like board parity action. Or trade up into something bigger. And otherwise, the reason he's in here is that you can kind of wait a little bit and drop this easy 1-drop later on that then will turn on your coordinate for maybe your Ahsoka flip or something. And then next turn, it's a threatening body. Like, even though it's easily removed, the opponent has to attack it, which leaves things like your Ahsoka in play or some other units that are still going to do a ton of damage. I like when everything does 3 damage. That's a kind of a theme in this deck. As much as possible, I try to do 3 damage with my attacks because that number adds up pretty quickly. We have L337, 2/2 with shielded. You know, it's an improved cunning smuggler. Or improved crafty smuggler, because it can also rescue a unit and you can smuggle it out sometimes. But really, it's a nice unit here just because that shielded does make it a little more resilient. It's a good wielder of hot shots, and it is a unit that is just tougher to take off the board, which kind of keeps your coordinate potentially on a little longer, which is nice. Sabine Wren, we know her. She's been around since set 1. She does good damage. She trades well. She pings shields off when she attacks. She also can deal base damage if the damage is overflowing, which sometimes it can be when you get that like +1 from the coordinate on Ahsoka or a red 3 raid or something. But otherwise, she's just good stats, and sometimes you can actually get that kind of like shoot first effect on something that has a little extra damage on it. There are a few things in here that can spread damage around a little bit and set that up as well if you do need to be attacking board. We also have Cassian Andor. Cassian has been a huge role player in these aggro decks ever since release in Shadows of the Galaxy. Is a just excellent unit to resource early on and then can be brought out right at the end of the game to get that final potentially 3 or potentially more in this deck, of course, damage on the board when you can really pad out your actions with those attacks, which our coordinate deck tries to do as much as possible, and then wait until kind of late in the turn, the opponent's exhausted options, and surprise, here's the extra 3 damage swing to close the game or something. So yeah, Cassian's great, fantastic unit to play in all aggro decks. Ezra is in here, and Ezra is really, because we're not playing green, so we don't have a lot of compressing like multiple unit attacks into one, and Ezra does a couple of things in here. Ezra does allow us to sometimes just get like free plays of extra units. You know, Ezra's really great to find things like Greedo or even Daring Raid off the top, because sometimes you just have you can kind of set up your resources appropriately after you do that initial Ezra swing to get a little bit of extra card value, which as an aggro deck really helps because you do run out of cards pretty fast as you're playing everything to the board. So getting a little bit of that extra value can help you kind of dump your hand and push for victory. And then the other really cool thing is when you hit one of our create an attack action compression effects, which would be breaking in, surprise strike, or actually in the right circumstance, Ahsoka's Padawan lightsaber as well. When you get one of those effects off the top with Ezra, then you get a mini rebel assault as well, and it can be really, really devastating when you do something like play a surprise strike on your Ezra, swing at the base for 6, then reveal a breaking in, and then use that on your K2SO, and then swing for 6 more with the Saboteur. So suddenly you cracked in for like 12 damage on your first action. The opponent wasn't expecting it, and now they have to play their whole game around the fact that they're maybe about to actually just die, that's really, really awesome. He's also a force unit. It's going to turn on the force throw that we do have in here, the one piece of kind of like anti-board tech that plays with a mini disruption discard package that we have here. So He's a great unit all around. I have never really regretted him. I know some people would cut him from lists because he does need to complete attacks. He's got some conditionality to him, but when he pays off, he really, really pays off. So I really enjoy playing him in here. Now we have the new Ahsoka Tano in here from Jump to Lightspeed, and this is like a less aggressive 4-drop, I'll admit that, but the when played effect is really strong in conjunction with some of the other effects like having Force Throw and then getting to use K2SO's discard. There are definitely games where, I mean, usually you want to push damage as much as possible, but you can use that discard to really control your opponent's actions and actually control their board as well when they're forced to discard a unit, which can kind of save your board, which in a roundabout way saves your coordinate, keeps it online. Or it just kind of prevents you in that race from taking too much damage back, so you can actually race out those Sabine decks. It's really, really devastating when the opponent's got like a Dark-Sabered Sabine and you start your turn with Ahsoka. They have to pitch a unit because that's all they kept. You exhaust their Sabine, and then you kind of have enough units in play now that they can't attack anything necessarily to then flip Ahsoka, coordinate, swing, and it feels really good. It goes really well when that happens. Also, I want to play her because it's Ahsoka, and I didn't play the legendary from Twilight of the Republic because it's really just not very good, but this Ahsoka is really very good. So happy to play her and just get more Ahsokas in the list. K2SO is here because K2SO is just a god of the board. Once he gets on there, he's so much impending damage, so much inevitability if he's kept on board or not. You know, he does that guaranteed 3 damage if he dies, or can combine with Ahsoka and Force Throw to get those discards to keep the opponent off their game, if that's what makes sense in the moment. But a lot of the time you just take the 3 damage, and he's got this really cool effect in here with all these effects like Hotshot Blaster, Surprise Strike, where he can swing into things that have maybe taken a little bit of incremental damage from things like the indirect on Red Squadron Y-Wing, which we'll talk about in a sec, and then get that overwhelm and then also die and deal 3 damage. I want to stress one thing that a lot of playing these red yellow aggro decks, and this is definitely the case here. It's all about figuring out how to compress as much damage into one turn as possible, because you can make your opponent play differently, or you can just surprise them, or you can actually, you know, go that one extra action faster than your opponent by finding the ways to sacrifice cards and board to deal damage. And this deck is a great example of that. If you've never really played the game that way, I highly recommend you actually build this deck and play through it a bunch of times until you kind of feel out how that math works. I find it really, really fun and really rewarding to play, but it's definitely worth just kind of experiencing that and understanding that aspect of Star Wars Unlimited as well. But yeah, that's what K2SO is super good at, getting that overwhelm, getting to attack into things, and also in that same action get the 3 damage. I like to think about that as like another surprise strike as well. You can surprise strike your K2SO into something that trades with him, overwhelm over, and then do 3 more damage. If that thing had just 1 HP remaining, it's going to be a monster amount of damage that the opponent's going to take. Now for our space package, it's a very, very straightforward, mostly set 1 space package that I'm running. There are other options you can run for some of these things, but I like these. They're consistent, they work well. Green Squadron A-Wing, Raid 2, it attacks for 3. It's the A-Wing, it's good. Red Squadron Y-Wing. Now, this is the new one from Jump to Lightspeed, and this one is not something that like everyone necessarily throws in their aggro decks, and I don't always understand. Like, I do understand why, but in my experience playing this thing with this on attack deal 3 indirect damage, a lot of the time your opponent will, even like early on especially, will have like one thing to spread it onto a little bit, and so this will end up doing like 2 damage to something and then 2 damage to their base, which is just, it's one worse than the Green Squadron A-Wing for sure, but like, then, you know, like I was just talking about with K2SO, you can kind of take advantage of that, or you can use things like Daring Raid to close the damage off and sort of put yourself a little bit ahead in a race in an aggro situation. Or a lot of the time they just don't want to put damage on stuff, or they have nothing to put it on, and then it just clocks for 4. Red Squadron Y-Wing clocks for 4 way more often than I think it has any right to, which is why I've never actually wanted to take it out of the deck. It always just seems to be pretty solid. The opponent doesn't like it in play. And it works, and it's got 3 HP, so it's a little more resilient than some other options. And it doesn't draw the opponent a card like Cartel Spacer, which I don't really want to do because that's antithetical to kind of the discard side of the deck. So yeah, I like it. It's worked pretty well. I could totally replace it. You could totally replace it if you don't like it. I like it though. It's pretty fun. Millennium Falcon. This is a card I had out of the deck for a little while because I was trying to figure out how budget I could make this. But with things like Hotshot Blaster being like $10 each already, I don't know. I just figured here's the most powerful version. If you're trying to build a budget version of this deck, And I would recommend you have hot shots either way because they will win you games all the time. But it's okay if you want to pull Millennium Falcon out and put something like Sabine's Masterpiece in or something that's a little cheaper. That's totally reasonable, but Falcon is better. Falcon is going to be the premium card to run as far as actually trying to do aggro damage, because a lot like that Cassian, it comes into play ready. It can attack the opponent right away. And that's huge. That's remarkably huge, especially when you're doing things like turning on that coordinate, so you can actually get that attack for 4 with it right away. In case I didn't mention yet, 4 is the highest cost in this deck. There's only 2 units that way. Otherwise, 3 is the cap. I don't want to go over 4, and I like everything to be 3 or less. It works a lot better with Ezra Bridger. You never get cards that you can't play. And it works really nicely to have more of these 3 drops, like things like Red 3 or Ezra in hand when you play that Falcon on turn 2, because the next turn you're going to want to pay the resource to keep in play. We're not playing Han Solo, so we don't get to do cheaty stuff with it. So we are going to be playing down to 3 resources, but that's really cool because in this deck, that's like a Surprise Strike and Daring Raid. That's a Green Squadron and a Force Throw, or that's a Red 3, or you can just, you can generally make it work as long as you're doing what you really need to be doing with this deck, thinking a turn ahead all the time. So powerful card, great early play, great late play as well. A great card to top deck when you're just like, you've got the opponent like 27 and they're just barely keeping off of losing. And it's a great card to hold on to be like, all right, now I have it. Now, after everything else, I can play this, close off the game immediately. And there's nothing you can do about it because we played chicken with actions already for a while. Red 3 is another one of these cards that is, it's a slower stat line than we expect at these days for a 3 cost in space. So it's a risk reward card for sure. That said, I like the reward here a lot. There are definitely a lot of situations where the opponent is just not ready to deal with units in space. So you can get this dropped on a board. It can even be potentially turning on coordinate before you swing with things to allow you to get the +1 from Ahsoka and then the raid damage. And it magnifies your damage quite a bit when it lasts in play. Like I was just talking about Falcon, it lines up nicely with a Falcon turn 3 into a Red 3, or Falcon turn 2 into Red 3 turn 3. It's good. I mean, it really does a lot of damage. It totally is a risk reward thing. It can get blown out, but I like it. And then now looking at our non-unit cards, the big thing here is that a lot of our cards here are really just trying to trade cards for damage. In fact, Force Throw is the only card that isn't trading cards for base damage, but it still is obviously trading a card for unit damage. So we have Daring Raid. I underestimated this card so much when it was released. It's crazy. It's really, really good because at some point with these aggro decks, it just comes down to throwing cards at the opponent and trying to win. Not to mention all the little sneaky things it can do, like picking off something that Han 2 plays and puts damage on, or something that trades into your Greedo, or, there's just all sorts of stuff. But that 1 resource costs so insane off of Ezra. You swing with Ezra, you find Daring Raid, you always play it. You almost always just go, yeah, I'll pay 1 just to get a free 2 damage, no cards in hand. That is so worth it every time. And a lot of the time your opponent will take initiative at some point because you have kept a good enough board and you're swinging, and then you can just dump your extra actions into any Daring Raids to base into hand and just lower that threshold more and more and more until you're able to just close the game on 1 swing. So it's awesome. Force Throw is kind of a weird card here just because it doesn't have the capability to attack base. And I think in an ideal world, every single thing in this deck would attack base, but it doesn't. But it does clear Sentinels. It does help you in races. It deals with things like Poe that are just too threatening. And sometimes, that added discard, again, like I mentioned, between Ahsoka unit and K2SO and the Force Throw can really pressure some decks in that, especially the mid-range decks in that mid game, from being able to actually control you. Mid-range decks tend to be your biggest predator with this deck because they will put down timely Sentinels. Han Data Vault is a really tough matchup. Han Data Vault has all the answers. It has blue squadron leader. It has Sentinels when it needs it. It plays them early. It can be really frustrating to deal with, but cards like Force Throw are kind of useful in that matchup for keeping them off of so many drops, keeping the worst threat out of play a lot of the time. So it's really good to have. And of course, it's just thematic with the Jedi. We have 2 copies of Breaking In here. Breaking In is Surprise Strike at home in this deck, but it does have the benefit of giving Saboteur to your unit, which just gives you main board a little bit of like anti-Saboteur gameplay, which I really like. Mostly just wanted to have more copies of things for like Ezra to flip to get those extra strikes off. And again, just turning cards into damage is really the name of the game here. Surprise Strike, I think, is one of the best cards in the game. I would not play 3 in a yellow deck, especially an aggro deck. I mean, I guess maybe some yellow decks you don't want to play. I don't know. I would probably play 3 in almost every yellow deck because it's just always good. From trading up into leaders when it's necessary to more often in this deck, just cracking in for an obscene amount of damage. Surprise Strike is always insane. Ahsoka's Padawan Lightsaber. So fun to get to run this card. It has been really good. When you see extra copies of it, you often just want to resource them, but you want to have one in hand a lot of the time because a lot of Ahsoka's turn 4s end up being something like attack chicken for a little while, action chicken, then playing something like a K2SO or an Ahsoka, or maybe you start with an Ahsoka unit, and you're always left with that one resource left over, which is so perfect in that deck because that one resource can represent an Ahsoka's Padawan Lightsaber right after you flip your Ahsoka. It can represent a Force Throw to deal with the unit after you flip your Ahsoka. Or it can just be a Greedo to kind of turn the coordinate back on after the opponent decides, ooh, I'm kind of afraid of Ahsoka. I need to actually attack one of their units to clear the coordinate. So that one extra resource is really cool. It always works out so well. And Padawan Lightsaber is one of the best ones to hold because when they don't have what they need to deal with your board, or more fun, when they underestimate you and don't understand how quickly Ahsoka is going to deal damage, then you flip out that Ahsoka, you Padawan onto her and swing for 7 or 8 if one of your units is red 3 into their base, and then they're like, panic time. And then they have to figure out how to deal with your leader while you still have other units in play. And it all gets pretty good. It's pretty fun. Also, don't forget, you can use this on unit Ahsoka to crack in for a 5 damage surprise strike, mini surprise strike as well. Well, so that's pretty sweet too. Finally, Hotshot. Hotshot is one of the coolest cards in the game. I love this card so much. I love that in this deck you can flip it off of Ezra sometimes just to get a +2 onto something. You don't get the attack right away, but you can buff some damage, which is really cool. But obviously, and a lot of the time with Ezra, if it doesn't line up nicely with my turn, I do just leave it on top because you want to draw it, you want to resource it, and then you want to smuggle it. And smuggling a Hotshot onto a K2SO is absurd because they have to kill the K2SO. It plays nicely with this Overwhelm, deals so much damage. Flipping onto an L3 is really great because now it's a 4/2 shielded that just is going to keep clocking them until they deal with it. And then even like Cassian, Ahsoka, even Ezra, those are all good flips. Or onto Ahsoka herself. Ahsoka can have a Hotshot and a Padawan Lightsaber, and she does a ton of damage when you have that too. So obviously just great card. And that's the list. You trade cards for damage. You put your cards out and then you do damage to the opponent's base. It's an aggro deck. That's what you do. But I really want to stress that, especially if you're playing this deck into other aggro decks, because you're playing Ahsoka, your math has to be just like pristine sometimes. If you want to win these games, you need to have the top tier pristine math. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know the priority of units to swing with. You need to read the board well. And you need to not flip Ahsoka into an ECL'd Poe Dameron. I'm going to tell you that right now. That's how you're going to lose the game against Green Sabine. They're going to do that. That's how you're going to lose. You have to not do that. Now we do have some options in the sideboard that are going to help in some of those matchups as well, which we'll talk about in a second. But I just, this deck is really fun. I really like this deck. Again, it's not a top tier aggro deck, but it is a really solid aggro deck because it uses this red yellow shell that you could really put any leader. You could put Anakin as a leader here, and it would be pretty similar, although you wouldn't run things like Padawan Lightsaber. It will run really well. But if you like Ahsoka, this is a good shell to run her in. It feels good. She does a lot of work. You'll get to rumble with Ahsoka. You'll have a good time, and it picks up games. Like I said, second to Store Showdown. I've been playing this on Karabast a bunch, and definitely pick up a lot of wins with it. I think it surprises people, and it's Ahsoka is better than people think. She's not top tier, but she's not awful either. She's actually pretty fun. So let's take a quick look at the sideboard now. So I have a few. I always give you options instead of a hard sideboard because it really just depends on the metagame, depends on what you're facing. But here are some things that this deck has trouble with that the sideboard can help with. Our first 3 cards are all dealing with upgrades because pilots can be really, really rough for this deck. Luke, Chewie, Han. These pilots can put way too much advantage in your opponent's favor. They can get a lot of value on some of your like space units when you really need them to not be just clearing your board constantly. So I really like running things like disabling Fang Fighter and Frisk to deal with those, and pilot leaders, especially the big ones like Vader or Lando. Bamboozle is insane for just getting rid of their leader, deleting it for 2 or free. Frisk obviously better for things early drops like Luke especially, or BB-8 or something. And then disabling Fang Fighter is great just generally, or getting rid of Sabine's lightsabers or other weird lightsabers. Maybe you're going to see some in the next set. I don't know. But, you know, it deletes any upgrade that you need to deal with. Perilous positions sometimes, or weird decks playing Carbonite and stuff. You know, disabling Fang Fighter is just a nice universal card to have in here, but it deals with pilots just as well as it deals with Darksabers and other stuff. Spec Force Soldier, I like this in here. Now, there's a lot of ways to kind of get through Sentinel decks, but one thing I was prioritizing with some of these choices, like things like disabling Fang Fighter instead of Confiscate, and things like Spec Force Soldier instead of other Saboteur sources, is because I want to put more units in play, because I want to keep Coordinate online. So I'm valuing cards that can be played as a unit specifically to be able to make sure we have as many options as possible to turn that Coordinate back on. And Spec Force Soldier, a lot like Greedo, is a great card to just hold on to. Play chicken on the other arena while you wait for to deal with the Sentinel, then drop the Spec Force Soldier a little later, turn on the Coordinate, and then start swinging into the Sentinel, especially on that turn 4 when you're going to flip your leader. That can be a huge turn for you. Absolutely crazy. So it's actually a really sweet unit in here because it works with Coordinate and it gets rid of Sentinel. And then Cham Syndulla is a kind of an all-star from the new set in the right circumstances. And this one, if your opponent ever plays a single resupply or super laser tech, Cham is a really fun card to bring in because it allows your Ahsoka flip to happen a turn sooner while also putting a 5/4 into play. That's really sick. That's really good. So that's a lot of fun, and I highly, highly recommend doing that because that gives you that sort of faster turn, faster flip that is going to put those decks off kilter, because what those decks are going to try to do is ramp into stabilization, and Cham's a great card to make sure they stay destabilized. But yeah, if there's other stuff, if you try this deck and there's stuff you like to sideboard, if you have a version of Ahsoka that you've been playing, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you guys about your deck. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. It has been a while, like I said, since I've done these deck profiles. I know I talked for a little while, but I really wanted to dig into what makes this deck tick, and especially approach it for people who haven't played a lot of aggro in Star Wars Unlimited. It's a ton of fun to play. I would love to hear your thoughts on Ahsoka, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's the best leader in the game and nobody figured it out. I don't think that's true, but let me know what you think of the deck or the leader down below. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Thank you so much for watching. More Star Wars Unlimited content is on the way, so stay tuned. We'll see you guys in the next one.